So I'm going to just kind of touch base really high level on the one software that you may need to add to the arsenal alongside Blue Sky Plan. It's called Meshmixer. This is a little bit more advanced. So don't feel like you're screwed if you can't figure this out, but it's good to have this. This is like that paint tool. So sometimes you have an object, you downloaded it from MyTarot, you have a model, you're like, I need to print this, but something's off with it, or something got messed up on the model. I just need to do a little edit or a little tweak. This is like your editor. It's your free editor that you can open any STL, and you can tweak it. You can mess with it, manipulate it. You can draw on it, whatever you want to do. This is your software to do that. You can smooth objects. So let's just say you got a rough spot on an object and you just want to smooth it really quick. Blue Sky has that function, but sometimes it's easier to bring it into here and do a quick smooth. Drawing on objects, you can inflate, deflate, you can bend, you can move and manipulate objects just like it was like you're playing with Play-Doh almost. So you can thicken up objects if you have a really thin area on an object. Like let's say you have a surgical guide, you printed it and you're like, man, it's really thin in this one area. I don't want to go redesign the whole thing. I just need to thicken up an area a little bit. This would be a good software to do that. You can plane cut an object, you can combine objects, you can separate objects. This is the software that you'd want to open up and inspect an object if it seemed to be having problems. So if you think about when you want to print something, printable object has to be a watertight skin. So an STL is really just a mesh of a bunch of different triangles all layered next to each other to create some sort of object. And an object is watertight when there's no holes in it. Printers struggle with an object that has a hole in it. Now Rayware is pretty good with, if you guys seen, you dropped any like objects onto the print bed and it says mesh error detected, click to repair. That's all it's doing, is it's just closing a little hole in the mesh somewhere. And so you don't really see it because it's kind of just happening in blindly. You're clicking repair and it's like, oh, it's fixed? Okay, it looks the same. There was some little hole or defect that Rayware fixed. But sometimes you have to be able to do that yourself so that you can build a guide on it or whatever you want to do. This just allows you to do that. And so I'm going to show you how to inspect an object. So if you have an object that's giving you failure, sometimes you just drop it in, hit inspect, and it'll point out a hole deep down in this weird crevice. You're like, I didn't even see that hole. And you just click to repair it.
Would you say it's kind of like your fine-tuning software?
Yes, yeah. Fine-tuning software just to tweak and fine-tune. The other thing that's important to think about is, so we talked about an STL is a mesh of all these little triangles. Well, just like the resolution on our TV can be really fine pixels or like big broad pixels resolution, same with our files. The smaller the triangles, the more complex and dense that mesh is and the higher the resolution. And that will affect, the file type. So you could have the same STL take up 5 megabytes on your hard drive or 250 megabytes on your hard drive based on the resolution or the mesh density. But hard drive space isn't a huge concern for most of us. It's cloud storage. We don't really think about that too much. But what we do think about is like the processing power it requires to edit that mesh. So sometimes you're like drawing on a mesh or like working on a mesh or an STL and it's like super slow and laggy and everything functions are slowing down and taking a long time. One of the problems may be that like you're working on an overly dense mesh, like really high resolution, so the computer's thinking way harder than it maybe needs to be. So Meshmixer allows you to reduce or increase the resolution of the object if need be. And so you could reduce it so low that like you actually lose resolution, like the mesh gets blurry and you're like, oh, I need more fine detail. So I guess in a perfect world, you'd want just enough fine detail to do the thing that you need to do with that object and not any more that's creating a more complex file that's requiring a lot more processing power and hard drive space. So just something to consider, because we run into that a lot. Like we do a lot of like complex functions with design. And sometimes we're like, dude, this thing is just laggy. Like I'm trying to move and select stuff and it's just chomping. And we're like, it's because maybe the mesh density is so high and you can reduce that. So inspecting objects, I kind of want to show you just how to like drop a file into Meshmixer, click the inspect function, and it'll point out any holes in the mesh, which is really good to know because sometimes you just need to watertight and close that mesh in order for it to work. To make solid is like taking a bunch of meshes or a bunch of files that are like next to each other and overlapping, and they all just become one watertight object with no, what would you say, no like depth to them. Like it's just one watertight object versus a bunch of objects that are laying on top of each other.
I guess that's a good way of putting it. Or it can make planes into solids. That's a really important feature of it. For example, if you export or it just looks like a draped sheet, you can make that draped sheet close in on itself and become a solid, and then it's printable.
Like an eggshell, when you export it as eggshell, it's not watertight, right? It's good to like be able to have it in Blue Sky and look through the underside when you're adjusting occlusion, but it's not gonna. It's not gonna print. It's got to become watertight. Now, generally, Rayware again is pretty smart. When you drag it in, it say this needs to be closed, and it'll do it in Rayware. But Meshmixer.
Too easy to, right? Just make solid, right?
Make solid.
Yeah.
It recreates the file into a solid. Basically, it's kind of like a refresh function for whatever you're working on.
Yeah.
Did you cover the resolutions? What about matching the resolutions if you have two different files?
I didn't really yet, but yeah, I know. I'm trying to think how to bring that in is when that's important. Yeah, because sometimes you get advanced functions when you're trying to like subtract an object from another object. So if you think about when we're doing like snap-on smiles, you have a wax up and you have an original, and you're really just subtracting an original from a wax up. Does that make sense? And what you're left with is everything that was additive to that, and that's what gives you that shell. But sometimes you're trying to subtract a mesh with 1080p from one that's a 4K, and the computer's like, hey, these aren't really the same resolution. So there's.
If you subtract a big triangle from a small triangle, you can't do it. The triangles have to be the same size. So if you click the refresh function and make them the same size, then the smart software in our computers can work with it.
Yeah. So these are kind of some just advanced concepts, like from a high level, that just to kind of help understand the concepts like what STLs are. A bunch of triangles, and they can be small or big, and they sometimes need to be watertight, repaired. So those are just some terminologies to know. Boolean union, Boolean difference, it's combining objects or subtracting objects. So Boolean difference is a term that we use for subtracting one object from another. So like snap-on smiles. You got your wax up, you got your original, and you're just subtracting it from it. So those are some high-level just terminology things. That way you kind of know the language a little bit of this stuff. If you never touch Meshmixer, you still will be able to do a lot of digital design just in Blue Sky. But I want you just to kind of get the idea of some of this stuff. Another important concept too, as we're just talking about this, like all of these things that we're doing, like when we're making surgical guides and splints, they're made on what's called an undercut model. And we kind of talked about this, is like when you scan someone's mouth, they have all these undercuts. And an undercut model is finding a point of view, a point of insertion, and saying, okay, make a new model that looks down from that point of view, that's just draped straight down with X amount of undercuts that you allow. So when we increase the undercuts, it will bring more undercuts within. When you go to an undercut of 0, the height of contours just goes straight down. So if you have a height of a tooth and you're looking straight down, it'll literally just cut and create a new model straight down with height of contours straight down. Does that make sense to everybody? And so what that comes into play is like we have to choose those for every function that we're doing, whether it's a surgical guide, a denture, a splint. Is we have to tell it how much undercut do we want. And that depends on how big is the object, how loose or tight is the material we're printing with. Flexible material is going to have more flex than a hard resin. So that's why we increase the undercut more on our splints, because we're using flexible material.
Like the conversation earlier, like when you have a totally tooth-borne single tooth implant, and your surgical guide's sitting on both teeth, you probably don't need much undercut. You can just place it there.
Right.
Good. If you have a distal extension where you're placing a couple of implants distally extending, you probably want it to snap in tighter so that it doesn't move, or you have to hold it one finger, right? Or one thumb or something as you're drilling your holes.
It's absolutely right.
Do you really need it tighter, or do you just need it longer? It just needs to cover more of the arch so you can hold it on.
A combination of those.
And it should change your comfort level, right? So you feel comfortable holding it with the thumb while they drill the holes.
That's where your creativity comes into it. You can make it whatever you're at, make it.
I did.
Two pins there too. It'll work out.
Yeah, and you could do a couple different options and then bring them both to the chair side and see what you like better. Yeah, because I did one the other day. It was double distal extension, and it was like a full arch tight, right? And it snapped on, and it snapped really. And she's like, "Oh, that's tight," And I'm like, "Okay, it's good," but that thing was rock solid, And I could drill on the distal extension of that guide and do implants without that thing moving at all. But then pull it off. So you gotta think about these things. There's no wizard that just says you should do this for everything. You have to try. This is where you have to kind of have that common sense where you think about how much retention do I need on this object, and that's where you choose both your undercut and your spacer between the object and the tooth or the gums.
What's the default?
It depends. So surgical guides, I think is 0.1 undercut and 0.15 spacer or something like that.
Like a 30-degree insertion.
Yeah, and then and it defaults to.
It's 12 degrees.
Is it? Yeah, I guess.
Brady knows all the changes. I'm behind.
He knows more changes than we do.
We were just talking about that today, earlier. Yes, with the new updates that they just did in the last month.
Yeah.
They've been really stuck.
They did. Yeah, some new updates that tighten things up.
Insertion stuff, and they're tight now.
Mm-hmm.
My last 2 or 3, I just had to cut them in half and just toss seriously half the thing.
Yeah.
I tried to adjust them. I'm like, screw it. So the last 3 I just did 1 tooth on each side, and they went in way easier.
Nice.
Just because it was.
Yep.
I've only done one of them, but it went in just because I had less teeth to worry about.
Yeah. And and everybody's printer might be calibrated a little different, tolerances and the curing after, and so you just got to do a few. And when you do a case and you're starting off, run it through a couple different settings and print 3 of them. I mean, they're a couple bucks maybe of resin, and then just calibrate. Just figure out what you like and what works good. So, this is important. No undercuts may lead to an object that's too loose, or too much it might not seat, and spacer's the opposite. No spacer and it might not seat. Too much spacer and it might be too tight. So you got to find that play. So most of the softwares are just kind of defaulted to something, but you might have to tweak it. So those are just important concepts to think about. Let's see. So I'm going to just show you. You guys don't have to do much hands-on on Meshmixer here. If you want to, cool. I would suggest just watching and just kind of seeing here.
You gonna make one?
Yeah.
Nice.
I'm going to show. So for this one, we're going to use George M. And I like this. Oops. I like this file because it's got a couple different aspects in it that I wanted to show here. So this was a patient, came in. We did 4 implants for an overdenture. He had the implants placed, and now he's ready to restore. So obviously there's always a couple different ways to do this. Some things that I want to point out that I like to do is, you guys are using locators. So Zest makes the locators. They came out with a locator scan body that you can snap onto locators and acts as a scan body. But you really don't need scan bodies for locators, but what it acts as is a really good block out that you can snap on the locator and give just enough space for the housing plus a little bit of wiggle room for the lab. So they're bigger than the housings. That's the key. They're bigger than the housings. That way your lab can't make it any smaller, so you don't have to sit there boring out your denture trying to make sure that it's passive and thinking, I think it's not touching my housings. I think I can pick it up. So if you like doing chairside pickups, use these, and you can 3D print them. I called them and got the STL file, so I can send you these, and you can print them and just snap them on your locators, and then take your impressions over those. Now you don't have to purchase anything, just print them and they're cheap. I turned the resolution down on this model. You can tell. You see how it's kind of blurry right here? I did that purposefully so it's not going to like slow down and chug on like editing. But I acquired this scan via just a preliminary impression, but I wanted to make a custom tray / wax rim for this patient. And so first I want to look at the model and I want to say, okay, is the model watertight? Well, you can already see there's a couple holes in this, so I left it that way so that I can show you the first function that you want to do to clean up this object. So under the analysis tab here, these are your tabs on the left. Under your analysis tab, this is an important function. It's called the inspector. And this inspector points out every hole or problem in a mesh so that you can visualize where they are. Now, it's saying that this is a hole, this is a hole, this is a hole, and then it'll always call an open model a hole on the bottom. Now, I'm not quite sure what these purple ones are. It's finding some other little fold or something in the mesh. But if you want to close every hole, you can hit auto repair all, and it'll close every hole in there. But it'll also close your base, and so sometimes you might not want to close that. So if you don't want to, you just close each of these little circles here, and it'll close all these holes in that mesh. So Analysis Inspector allows you to pull up meshes and see exactly where holes are and problems are in your mesh. So I didn't want to close the base just for this demonstration, so I didn't close that. And so now I hit done, and now I've got no more holes in this mesh here. So your select function allows you to select different parts of the mesh here. I can click here, and orange means it's selected. So I want to make a custom tray really quick for this patient so that I can print it out and I can do my final impression on him. So let's get my selector sized here how I want it. And I'm going to go across and I'm just going to select the outline of my tray that I want to make my custom tray. So however you want to do it, I won't spend a ton of time here.
There's a quicker way to do this, by the way, if you want.
Analog?
You just select the whole entire thing, and then just unselect your perimeter all the way around.
That's true. Yeah.
There you
Just
go.
select the whole thing, and then just go right around the outside and erase it.
That's a great idea.
Anyway.
And you'll find these little things that you
Yeah,
prefer to do.
I've done a couple custom trays.
Have you done some with Meshmixer?
Yeah, same
Oh,
thing.
good. Okay, so you
Well,
watched
select
like
the whole model and then just run around the outside right there to erase it.
perfect. That's
It
a great
doesn't
idea
matter,
too.
Either way works.
So you got your surface selected, and now if you guys want to write this down, you can. But there's really 3 functions that you're going to do next. You're going to do. It's going to say offset, separate, and extrude. And so those are the 3 functions we're going to run on this selection here. So what offset does, so that's our first one. If you go up and go into edit and go into offset, offset is going to create a new layer that's offset some distance of spacer. So this is essentially your spacer. So let's say I want 1 millimeter of spacer between the model and the custom tray. I'm going to tell it to say 1 millimeter. And this is going to make some new layer here that's sitting up off of the, if I hit accept here. You see how that kind of made a new layer? You just kind of see through the side of here. See that?
It's floating.
It's floating, yeah. It's 1 millimeter off of my model. Now I have this layer here that's still selected. I'm going to go in and I'm going to separate it. So that was your second click. So you got offset, separate, and then extrude. So separate made it its own object. So it popped up this little object browser, and now we have a part. So we could literally call this, like, you can rename it custom tray. You know, there's your upper impression. Now you have your two objects. Now they're separated as two different objects, and I can turn off the visibility on different objects here.
Liam, Matt?
Yeah.
Oftentimes we get into Meshmixer, and that little window you're using on the right isn't there anywhere. How do you get that thing to show up?
View, object browser.
Thank you.
Yep.
I was smashing my head against the wall the other day with that.
Yep.
I've been there too, exactly.
Trying to add
them together, and you don't know, well, where do I find it? How
Yep.
do I do that?
Yep.
It drives you crazy.
So here's the start of my custom tray, but all it is a skin. There's absolutely no depth to it at all. This is not a printable object. It's literally just a skin that looks like the base, but it's 1 millimeter off of my original impression. So the last function that you're going to do is called extrude. This is so I have to select the whole thing. So sometimes, usually double clicking an object in any sort of CAD program will select the whole thing. So I've got this all selected, and I'm going to find my last function, which is extrude. Now extrude tells the object to expand in all dimensions. So this is giving us our depth or our thickness of our tray. Now, the one thing that you have to change, and it defaults to, you notice how it kind of looks funky right here? It's because it's extruding it all up, straight up, instead of out in the direction that it's aiming. So you have to change from constant to normal. And do you see how it just fixed that? So constant is defaulted, which is kind of odd. It's like saying every pixel goes straight up in the air. Well, sometimes that isn't where it needs to go. Like in here, in the area of here, it needs to go out, not up. So that's why normal tells it to go straight out from itself. So now you can see how I have a thickness here. Here's your thickness.
It's not making it bigger on the inside?
It's not on the inside.
It goes out.
It goes out.
It only takes it out. Otherwise, it would close your millimeter gap. Right?
Correct.
It'd hang up on right.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's smart somehow. It knows. But I can sit here and I can change and make it as thick as I want to make it. So let's just say you like 1.5 millimeters, 1.5 might be just perfect. And so there's, now you have a 1.5 millimeter.
Are you, sorry Matt, are you printing your custom trays in 1.5 millimeters? Because I've done this in the study model white, and 1.5 is way too flimsy. I have to go 3 millimeters to actually like have some rigidity to it.
Really?
What have you been doing on this?
You know, it's been a little while. I swear I was doing them pretty thin, but again, it's been a little while since I've done that. So yeah.
Do you think about the curing maybe?
Maybe. They're just pretty flimsy. They
Very flimsy?
crack pretty easy.
I guess, yeah, I would think that 1.5 should be okay, but
And you can make holes in them too?
yeah, you can make holes in it. You could do that within the software. So I'm going to hit accept here. So now I have my cute little custom tray. You can do all kinds of cool stuff on this. Like you can go in your sculpt tool, and here's all these brushes. You could sit here and like, if you wanted to get fancy and make it polished. I mean, I don't really care if it's a little rough on the edge. Like you're just taking an impression in it, right? If you like to put your wax rims yourself on, I've done this before, where like if you want to put some areas of retention in here. Let me turn this up here. I've done this before where I put these like little bumps in here, where I've inflated these little bumps. You can make them as thick as you want. If you like to lay wax over it and capture your final impression and your wax rim at the same time. But I mean, this program literally allows you to sit here and you can paint, you can draw, you can do whatever you want on objects. So you can get creative and you could make an entire surgical guide in this program if you wanted to. It's more for just tweaking, editing, manipulating, little side project kind of stuff. there's just sometimes where you're in blue sky and you have an STL and you got to bring it out into Meshmixer, do something, and bring it back into blue sky. When we get into the full arch stuff and we're doing more complex bone reduction guides, all the really, really advanced stuff, sometimes you just need Meshmixer to just do a function for you. So, let's see. Anything else? What else? Anything else we should?
You can even add a handle to it if you want.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there you go. So I mean that.
A simple feature like that, you think about it, you can probably do it in Meshmixer.
Yes.
It's a little bit of a kind of a set and forget program. Do you kind of agree?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah, you can make a handle.
Yeah, I've never seen it done that way. What did you do? You just did it with the brush function?
So the inflate.
So
right. Brushes, inflate, and then you can add a handle there.
Or there's a set kind of library of solids. You can add a solid in there and combine the solids. It's all up to you how you think you can do it.
Yeah, so you can drag. It's got a few different objects. If you ever needed different objects, you know. Okay. Yeah, so that's kind of a high-level view of Meshmixer.
How would you put little holes in it?
Little holes in it.
You got the pattern feature. Or you can pattern in under.
No. How was that again?
So let's see. In edit. Yep. Let's select it. And then make pattern. There we go. Right below it. And then you can select the polarity, so make them up and down. If you want to retain like your, impression material, you can always do this feature and then just click accept. All these little features, and then it kind of makes holes in it, but it didn't work too well this time because we were working on the upper STL. Just play around with it, there's a lot of different features, a lot of different tutorials. We made these cylinders too big, that's why the honeycomb is, a little bit blocked out, but if you want to make little holes everywhere, you can do that. If you want to put parts everywhere, you can put a little logo on it.
Yeah, so I mean, if you wanted to perforate holes in it, Doc, what would you think is the fastest way here? Because this isn't going to select through the bottom of it, right?
Yeah, it will. It'll go through.
If it's big enough of a sphere.
And now you have to outline those little guys.
To see if I
There you
delete
go. Now
those.
hit the delete button. Or it's...
Because it's only going to delete
If you want
the
to do
top.
this, it'd probably be for the extrude feature. So
Yeah.
through the mesh and then extrude it. Sometimes you can, miss a step and then you kind of have to backtrack a little
back or delete?
Control Z, yeah.
Just keep going all the way
I
back.
put holes in mine at the end like this many times.
Or just take a handpiece and put holes in it.
So when you're at this skin layer here, you could sit here and you could do this, delete, because this is a one pixel layer here. And so now you got holes in this. Now you can double click it and you can do your extrude feature now. Now you got holes in it.
Perfect. Now we can retain things.
So you could perforate before you, you can perforate it before you extrude it. And then that way it'll carry the perforations through. And then don't forget to change this to normal there. So, great little trick.
Just print these out in model white or gray or something.
Yeah, model resin. Now, and then,
that for retention?
retention of material.
Yeah, because that sticky stuff just doesn't work very good, right? I like holes in it to hold it.
Yeah, I feel like it melts the material too.
It just doesn't stick very good. It peels
But
out on something.
if you print those Zest scan bodies and use them as just spacers, you bring those to the chair and bring this to the chair and you snap those on and then just take an impression in this, the lab is going to have a really nice impression and then it's going to have spacer where they're not going to make it too tight over your locator housings. So that way it forces them to leave you room. And that way when they come in the day of, you put your housings on and that denture should seat over for your pickup pretty well.
Are you sending the impressions or are you scanning what you get?
Yeah, that's a good question. So we kind of have done it both ways. this guy allows you to take a final impression and throw your final impression inside the scanner and send that straight to your lab digitally. So they get that and they can inverse that and literally print a model. So you can digitally pour up the model. So they could get a digital impression, and you could do this yourself, and then reverse it, and now it's a digital model. Because that's all pouring up is. Stone pour up is just inverting that impression into stone. And so you can do that digitally in Blue Sky Planet, the lab can do that, and then they could 3D print your master cast right away. And then they could go fabricate off of that.
And I think the ray scan units with that impression scanner should be able to do that.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear more about that.
It's not picking up light body very well.
You have to calibrate this machine.
What's that?
You have to calibrate the machine and material.
Have you seen some?
Well, before they left, I'm like, hey, I need to, can you show me something? And every material we scanned was not calibrated, so they had to go through and calibrate every material. It's a pain in the ass.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Once it's all in there, it's in the system, it'll be nice.
Then it should scan.
I've scanned several impressions. I kept doing them on myself and just seeing if they would scan.
I just had one this week.
The heavy body ones scan great.
Yeah.
It picks up my heavy body real well.
There's certain materials that are more radio
opaque
or whatever.
Yeah. It specifically says it has to be a radio opaque PBS.
Well, it wasn't picking up 3D printed models either. Because I was like, well, what if I just...
So yeah, it wouldn't do that. Yeah, because there's nothing in there that's radio opaque.
They were able to calibrate it.
Oh, they were? Oh, it did. Okay. What was the resolution like? And do you feel like it was fairly accurate? Good. I mean, good enough probably to go through a denture process because there's just enough slop in that, but not a crown and bridge, but a denture process probably. Cool. So, yeah, we're gonna after lunch we're gonna go through data acquisition specifically for dentures. Like, how do you get this stuff into the software with or without this? Right? This just cuts out a little bit of time, but and makes it really full digital. But you can still utilize some aspects just even with the iTero or maybe with the ray scan.
So when you get to this point, are you making a custom tray and adding on teeth right to it so you can capture a bite? Are you printing that custom tray with teeth on it?
I think that's a cool. I've done that before, and I do like that because
to make your whole wax strand and master impression all in one sitting.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's the closest thing to the patient coming in with existing dentures that you just wash and send to the lab, right? That's your best bite vertical aesthetic thing ever.
Because you transferred that right there to Blue Sky and go through the denture module like we just did and put a bunch of teeth on it.
Yep.
You can, as long as you have a vertical and everything established with a cone beam, right?
So
a scan and a cone beam.
Yeah, let's just say you were doing an upper, right? And let's just say you wanted to drag a chain of teeth on there, and you really don't even know where you're at. But at least you have something you print it, and it's got teeth, and you could take an impression in, you could do an adjustment. You could grind on the teeth, you could add, you could take a bite in the mouth and take photos, and at least you have a photo of something where the lab can see it. Versus like a wax rim. It's kind of like doing a wax rim, but instead of just a pink block, there's a little bit of teeth definition. I personally always struggle with smile with the wax in there. And it's I like seeing teeth. But normally on this, I would just print it and layer a piece of base plate wax on it and just go. But I've definitely done it where you drop in a chain of teeth just for something, for the eyes to look at and take your bite chair side. Either way. Yeah.
All right, cool.